is the Marxist mode of production heterogeneous? All right, I'm going to have to look up that word, first of all. I saw it earlier. They expire after some time. Well, I'm really sorry to hear that. Okay, so we'll answer this. First of all, I gotta learn a new word, right? Is the Marxist mode of production heteronomous? Heteronomous, right? What does that mean? Acting in accordance with one's desires rather than reason or moral law, due to its goal of unlimited abundance. Must autonomy break from historical materialism via self-limitation and ecological finitude? All right, well, first of all, Socrates dancing, there's no Marxist mode of production, all right? There's no Marxist mode of production. Marxism is an understanding of how history works, an understanding of the way the world works. It expresses itself in terms of philosophy, in terms of dialectical materialism. It expresses itself in terms of economics, in terms of historical materialism. It expresses itself as the communist political movement. It expresses itself with an understanding of the economic laws of the capitalist system. That's Marxism, right? And I've strayed from Marxism in a lot of ways. But Marxism argues that history goes through various modes of production out of necessity. At first, there was hunter-gatherer civilization. We got too good at hunting and gathering. We had our first ecological crisis, so we had to start growing our own food. And with the origin of agriculture and the origin of private property in the state, we had slavery. Out of slavery emerged feudalism, which is much more efficient. Out of feudalism emerged capitalism. And the idea is that capitalism eventually will give way to socialism. And socialism is when the economy, the industrial economy of capitalism, that is so advanced, becomes rationally organized, right? Engels compares socialism to the Voltaire arc, right? You have lightning, you have static electricity, but then if you take electricity, all that energy that's just out there, and you concentrate it and you organize it, it's much more powerful, right? And that it's taking all of that industrial development of capitalism, but having a rationally organized economy, rationally organizing it, centralizing the means of production so that it can become concentrated, it can raise the productive forces. And so you create a huge advance in technology, because no longer do people get poorer because of technological advancement. No longer are people hungry because there are too many houses. No longer are people homeless because there is too much food. And as a result, the level of wealth in society increases and increases and increases. And the goal is that eventually you build a world of so much abundance and so much technological advancement that people only have to work because they feel like it. Labor becomes life's prime want. And that there's no need for a state. Everyone's pretty much equal because there's so much abundance, right? That's the idea. So what you're asking is this system, this way of doing things, right? Is this way of doing things, is it heteronomous in that people are working in their own economic interest? Well, that is one of the central understandings of Marxism, is that people work out of their own economic interest and that people are motivated by their own economic needs, right? And that is something that a lot of the critics of Marxism raise, right? And that it's the point of historical inevitability, right? That people will inevitably, it'll be in their economic interest to rise up and centralize the means of production, just like it was in economic interest of the mercantile classes to overthrow feudalism, just like it was in the economic interest of people to organize agriculture and move away from hunter-gatherer civilization. Is that people act out of their basic economic interests, and that if you look at the historical materialist narrative of history, there's very little role for the human will. It all just kind of naturally happens. Okay, and that is a very common critique of Marxism. And Marx and Engels wrote about this. And there's even a book by Plekhanov called The Role of the Individual in History. But a central point of Marxism is this belief that people just do what is in their economic interest. Okay, that's like a central belief of the Marxist ideology, is people act in their own central economic interest. So if you think that is heteronomous, right, that people just do what is in their economic interest, in the classical Marxist worldview, that is the truth. Now, as someone who is somewhat critical as someone who doesn't totally accept dialectical materialism and argues that there is spiritual power and that people do have the ability to work against their own economic interests, I would say that's what puts me slightly at odds, right? I really like the book Heroes, Heroism, and the Heroic in History by Thomas Carlyle. And that book is largely a book that Marxists critiqued. In the book by Plekhanov, the role of the individual in history, that book is largely a critique of the work of Thomas Carlyle. But ultimately, Marxism, as an economic and historical materialist worldview, does view people as working in their own economic interest. Now, the self-limitation and ecological finite point, I don't agree with that at all. I believe scarcity and the idea of limited resources is a lie, and I'll tell you why. Because if we were still doing what people did in the 1400s and burning wood to heat our homes, this planet would have lost all its trees a long time ago, and we would have run out of wood. But we don't do that anymore. We burn fossil fuels, coal, natural gas. We have electrical heating, right? There was a book published in the 70s called Limits to Growth, and it said that we were going to run out of oil by 1990. And we haven't run out of oil. Why? If we were still acquiring oil in the same way we acquired it in the 1990s, we would have run out of oil. But we invented deep sea drilling. We invented hydraulic fracking. We discovered new oil deposits. And now, actually, we have oil for at least the next 70 years at this point, right? And so, there are minerals in Africa, in the mountains, that used to be completely worthless, that are now very, very valuable because of computer technology, and they're used in computer chips. There are all these rare earth elements that the U.S. government's really mad that China has. Well, China grabbed them because they used to not be valuable, but then electronic car batteries made them valuable. The way we interact with our environment is always changing. Yes, we are on a finite planet. There's only so much here. But the way we use what's here is constantly changing. We're constantly going to a more efficient way of doing things, number one. And number two, who's to say that we can only acquire resources from this planet? We have sent many probes to Mars. China has already acquired elements like helium-3 from the moon that they're using for fusion energy research. Why are you limiting man's capacity to acquire resources from this planet, number one? And why are you not taking into account that we are constantly reinventing the way we work with the resources that we already have, right? I do not accept limited resources, right? I just don't accept it, right? I just don't. And that limited resources is a Malthusian lie, right? It is used to instill pessimism in us, to promote the concept of overpopulation, to promote the concept of degrowth. And I just don't accept any concept of overpopulation. We need to use our resources strategically. We need to use them in a long-term and sustainable way. But the idea that growth is somehow bad, or that we're just going to run out of planet, anyone who talks that way is trying to kill you. That is the ideology of genocide. If the earth is only this, if the pie is only this big, the only way your share gets any bigger is by cutting into someone else's. And no one ever thinks their slice of the pie is big enough. And that's what leads to genocide and wars and all kinds of backwardness. The pie is unlimited. There is no limit to growth and human progress. Human beings are an amazing creature that is constantly moving toward a higher plane and a higher state of abundance. And so I do not accept that. There is no limit to growth, and that anyone who tries to tell you there's a limit to growth is trying to kill you, right? It is the nature of mankind to constantly be moving toward a higher state, toward a higher plane, right? And that it is fundamentally anti-human, and it is satanic to promote the idea that growth is somehow bad, that human beings are a cancer on the planet, that we've gone too far with civilization. And I would encourage you, it's spiritually bad for you to believe that. And are largely the people who disagree with me, if you really press them, that's what they're upset about. It's a spiritual disagreement. They want to be pessimistic. They want to hate their fellow man. They want to be hopeless. They want to be vengeful and rageful. They don't want to be optimistic. And so many of the people who argue with me, that is really what it's about. They are triggered by the fact that I believe in humanity, that I have love in my heart, and I believe in humanity and our ability to rise to a higher plane, right? And that is a belief that I fundamentally accept. And that is what people are triggered by, because our society has on blast a pessimistic message constantly everywhere. Nope, we've gone too far. There is no hope. It's everywhere. And it's a good place to hide, because if there is no hope, there's no responsibility, right? If you were always going to fail the test, there's no reason to study. But if you might fail the test, but you might get a good grade, then you have to study, because you might actually get a good grade. So it's easy to just say, oh, I'm going to fail the test no matter what. And then you have no responsibility. And that's the problem. Pessimism is a great place to hide. It's a great place to hide, but who ultimately benefits from pessimism is the people that are already in power, the elite. They're the ones who benefit from it the most, because they're already at the top. And so if everyone stops growing, they stay at the top forever. And that's why the British Empire and the Rockefellers have promoted Malthusianism like crazy. They're already at the top. And so now that we're at the top, game over, and we'll just degrow and make sure the world stays as is, with us always at the top. And that's why they can't allow Russia and China to rise up. And that's why they want to drive down living standards. And that's why they won't allow China to build power plants in Africa. And that's why they're furious to see Russia team up with countries in Africa to develop their mining resources. They want humanity to stop. That's why they hate Ibrahim Traore. That's why they hate Maduro. That's why they hate the Islamic Revolution of Iran. And that's why they hate you, right? They want to stop human progress so they can stay at the top indefinitely. But humanity will break free. Humanity will march forward. And this is innovationism. This is the understanding of innovationism, the innovationist perspective. There is no limit to human creativity. There is no limit to growth. And that the irrationality of capitalism and the globalist imperialist world order will be overcome by the human spirit and optimism marching forward. That is the innovationist perspective. And it takes the best from Marxism and it applies it to the crisis of our time. The fight in our time is the fight between growth and degrowth. The monopolies, the big monopolies that don't want growth, and the anti-monopoly coalition that is emerging around the globe of working class people, of small business owners, of anti-imperialist states that emerge from anti-colonial revolutions, all who want growth and expansion, right? The global anti-monopoly coalition, the global axis of resistance, the global struggle against globalism and imperialism, humanity breaking free from the artificial restraints of the dying world order. That is the hope for the future. And this is rooted in the traditional Marxist worldview, but it's taking it up to date. So I hope that analysis that I gave is helpful. I do want to see the rest of the question. And you did ask a follow-up, right? Wow, you just hit me with like 3 questions there. Boom, boom, boom. You said last time you need abundance for post-colonial success. That's why I use the term. That's not exactly what I said. You're misunderstanding the point. What I'm saying is that the way to get to a world without a state and without oppression and a world of equality is abundance. And what the countries that break out of colonialism are striving to do. What did Stalin do in the Soviet Union? He had 5-year plans and he built power plants and he built steel mills. What did China do? They lifted their country up. What is it that Gaddafi did in Libya, right? He created a country with the highest life expectancy in Africa. He built the Great Man-Made River. All the anti-colonial struggles are struggles to have growth. That's what they're doing, right? And the ultimate goal, if we're going to have a world that is stateless and classless and a world of equality, the only way to have it is abundance. And that anti-colonialism is the struggle for growth. That is my point. Now, Blog Grow Pro says, I've been to China. I see an entire highway of building, been at the same time on the horizon. It was scary. Abundance felt hyper-capitalism, not communism at all. Well, that's, again, the critique of capitalism is not stuff, right? And that, if you're opposed to growth, that's not anti-capitalism. That's Malthusianism. The critique of capitalism, go read the Communist Manifesto. At no point does Marx ever say, there's too much stuff and having stuff is bad. I was taught my whole life, capitalism means having money and having stuff, and communists want everyone to be poor because they're more morally pure. That's bullshit. And the people who believe that are woke leftists. But what did Stalin do? Stalin built 5-year plans and power plants so that Russians could have more stuff. What does the Chinese Communist Party do? They've raised China up so they can have more stuff, right? Raising people up out of poverty, building power plants, building irrigation systems like Gaddafi did. That is what anti-colonialism is about. If you're against people having stuff, you're not anti-capitalist. You are a pessimist. You are a Malthusian. The opposition to having stuff has nothing to do with anti-capitalism, right? Maybe you want to use stuff more efficiently, get rid of planned obsolescence, maybe be strategic in how we use our resources. But the idea that you saw all this building in China and that you didn't like that, well, that's not in line with any Marxist or historical materialist critique of capitalism. Max Stirner, self-interest, and Marxist communism, any link. How about MAGA communist? Does it hold? Okay, so Stirner wrote a book called The Ego in Its Own, and he was kind of an anarchist thinker who emphasized, individualism and stuff. And I am not as familiar with his work. I know it's popular in the alt-right. MAGA communism, I invented MAGA communism, but I was just never stupid enough to call it MAGA communism, right? MAGA communism, basically, I was the one who wrote the book and said, we need to build a movement that reaches out to people in the MAGA movement who are opposed to the FBI, who are opposed to the pandemic lockdowns, etc. And I wrote the book, Where is America Going? Marxism, MAGA, and the Coming Revolution. And I invented that. But I was smart enough to go, we're not going to call it MAGA communism, because everyone who's MAGA hates communism, and everyone who's a communist hates MAGA, and it's the most stupid niche thing ever. I invented it, and 2 jokers came along, 2 frauds who worked with the FBI against me, most likely. 2 frauds and con men appeared on the internet, and they did a very bad imitation of what I've done and what I've pioneered. And they worked with the FBI to smear and defame me. And then they created a situation that weakened me or whatever for a little bit. And then while they did that, they announced, we're MAGA communists. And they gave some of the dumbest interviews that I have ever seen. And they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. Yeah, man, like, I'm a communist, and like, I could rant about this all night, and I don't want to talk about it too much, but it's like, one of these interviews, the interviewer's like, well, I know you're a good person. You're not a communist. He's like, actually, I am a communist, man. Yeah, like, totally, dude. Like, they have no fucking clue what they're talking about. And they're frauds and they're con men. And there's a reason the Israeli government tweets them out and tweets April Fool's jokes about them. And there's a reason that they have gone after me viciously, right? I was just telling somebody today, they called up, well, never mind. Anyway, we're going to stop talking about that, right? But MAGA communism is not real. It never was. But I invented what you might call MAGA communism, and a stupid, cringe, made for social media brand, imitating what I did in the most childish, adolescent, juvenile way, emerged and called itself MAGA communism. And now they're trying to be regular leftists. That's all that happened. Can AI regulate degrowth? Does it inherently drive economic growth? I mean, in theory, right? If one tried to impose degrowth, one could use an AI algorithm to impose it. I don't see why not. I don't think that's a good thing. I'm opposed to degrowth, but AI could be used to set up some kind of degrowth model. But AI itself is not degrowth. And the degrowth crowd, they engage in a lot of moving the goalposts. Degrowth is one of these sacred cows. It drives me crazy. If you're an internet leftist, if you're a leftist who's brainwashed by social media, there's all kinds of things that you have to be for, right? You have to be for land back. You have to be for degrowth. And you have to be for abolish the police. Now, what do any of those things mean? What does land back mean? Right? It is true. This land that we're living on used to belong to Native Americans. So should all white people immediately leave America? No, that's just not realistic. There are people who argue that. And in 2017, when the West Virginia teachers strike happened, the local Workers' World Party branch actually made a meme that said the teachers were on stolen land and they should pay reparations instead of going on strike. And then they put out one settler, one bullet. So it does happen that there are people that just think, no, we should all just leave North America. However, sometimes land back means all white people leave North America. Sometimes land back means something I totally agree with, which is indigenous people should have a right to their own territory and should receive some reparations for what's been done to them. I agree with that. Sometimes land back is a program in Canada to privatize government land and build luxury housing with a company tied in with George Soros. It depends what it is. And you're not supposed to ask what it is. It's just land back. And if you're against it, you must be like a Nazi. And they can never tell you what it is, but they just know it's bad, right? So, if land back, and the same with abolish the police. Abolish the police is not a sensible policy. Most people say abolish the police. Oh, really? So there's a pedophile in my neighborhood and we just let him go, right? And, abolish the police. Oh, okay. There's people speeding on the highway and no one stops them because most people, it sounds nuts. Well, and if you press the abolish the police people, what they really mean is, well, we want to set up a police force that is in line with our woke revolutionary values. Well, then you're not abolishing the police. You're just creating new police. Why don't you say that? We want a new state. We want a revolutionary working class state. That's just old-fashioned communism. Why don't you call it that? Why are you like, abolish the police? Abolish the police sounds dumb to most human beings. And if you actually explain it, it's not abolish the police. It's create police that are in line with our values, right? Create community organizations that engage in policing, whatever. So why don't they say that? Well, because it's this mind fuck of abolish the police. What? You don't want to abolish the police. You're a fascist. It's like they invent some phrase and we're just supposed to believe it. Degrowth is the same thing. Degrowth is bad. If someone tells you economic growth is bad, they are trying to kill you. It is spiritually bad for you. It is the basis of Malthusianism. It is the basis of genocide. It is, for all the reasons I just explained, it's bad. Degrowth is bad. However, as soon as you say degrowth is bad, Jason Hickel or one of these jokers says, degrowth just means working from home. You're against working from home? Well, my friend, degrowth is not working from home. If we advance technology to the point that I can do my job without getting out of my home, I can actually, in my own home, do my job and accomplish it in the same way and have the same results, but I don't have to actually get up and go to my job. I can do it from my home. That's called growth, my friend. That's technological advancement. That's not degrowth. Degrowth, it just means using solar panels. No, it doesn't. No, it doesn't. If we're able to have more energy because we use solar panels, in addition to having, regular nuclear power and oil and other stuff, that's not degrowth. I'm not against using solar panels, right? But if you get rid of fusion energy and you get rid of nuclear power and you only use solar panels and we have 25% of the electricity, yeah, that's degrowth. I'm not for that, right? But they always move the goalpost to make degrowth mean benign things. However, the arguments for degrowth are always finite planet, limited resources. It's always Malthusianism. And then they say, oh, but we just want to do these common sense things. Well, none of those things are degrowth. And if finite planet, limited resources is true, we better start committing genocide, right? We better have birthing licenses. We better start exterminating, people, the useless eaters, right? It's all bullshit. Let me tell you something, my friend. Human labor power and human creativity is the source of all wealth. Human beings are not useless eaters. They're not non-productive consumers. Human beings are the source of all wealth. And if you want to have a prosperous society, you need a government that invests in people, invests in communities, helps people be educated, helps people be healthy, helps people have access to healthcare, puts people to work, doing useful work that's productive for society. If you want a strong, prosperous society, you need to invest in people. The myth of non-productive consumers is the foundation of Malthusianism. The idea that there's people out there that all they do is eat. All they do is eat. All they do is consume, and they don't produce. Every human being is capable of producing. But the idea, it's capitalism. It is our irrational economic system and the problem of overproduction and value crisis and the tendency of the falling rate of profit that makes it so there's all kinds of very strong, healthy people who aren't able to contribute to society. Technology makes it more and more efficient to produce goods, and as a result, there's more and more goods that people can't afford to buy. The wages, I'll put on the socialist math video, right? That's the problem. The problem is not that human beings are useless eaters. The problem is we have an irrational economic system that does not utilize human labor power to its productive capacity. That's the problem, is that human beings are very productive. Human beings are very productive, they're very creative, etc. The problem is our economic system, which is very inefficient. Watch.
Explain what needs to be explained, what used to be considered Marxism 101, about why it is that our Western capitalist economy is crashing and burning. And in order to do that, I'm going to have to do some math. And I hate math. Do you know why I hate math? Because I grew up in America. I went to public school in the United States of America, so I am going to, at risk of embarrassing myself, because math was never my best subject, I am going to do some mathematics here on the board for you to explain the problem.
We very much enjoyed Caleb's speech.
So if you are creating a product, right? If you're a factory owner, you're making a product, you are going to need the material through which that product is made, the manufacturing materials. So that'll be A.
The simple equation you put forward to explain the crisis of overproduction and the falling rate of profit.
And you're probably going to need to transport the product to where it's sold. That's B.
It broke down where your money goes.
You're also going to have to pay your labor costs. Labor costs are represented by C.
Explanations of those concepts that people are able to understand.
Then when consumers purchase the product, they're going to pay a final price. And that final price is D. However, there's a problem with that.
I like the fact that he framed it that way to make it very clear.
Which is that the capitalist can't change how much A costs. He can't change how much B costs. So the profit of the capitalist can only be extracted from the value put into it by the worker. And this is the basis of Marxism, the understanding of surplus value.
I've never seen it explained so simply anywhere. I've never been able to explain it that simply.
So C, the labor value, is divided. You have C1, which is what the worker actually gets paid. And then you have C2, which is the profit that the capitalist makes. And it all adds up to D, which is the final cost of the product. Now, the way people in the United States who talk about Marxism generally talk about this is they say, well, this is unfair. They say the worker is not getting paid the full value of his labor. But they're missing one of the most important points, which is not just that it's unfair and then people argue, well, what about the employer? He put up the money, doesn't he deserve to be? That's all a distraction. Because the important thing to understand is this. C1 is always going to be less than D. The wages paid out to the worker are never enough to buy back the product that he produces. There is always more products created than there are wages paid out to the worker. And this is the built-in problem of capitalism, the problem of overproduction. And it is always there in the capitalist economy. It never goes away. And they have invented all kinds of crazy mechanisms to try and deal with the problem of overproduction. Part of the reason that the US government has purchased billions and billions of dollars worth of cheese only to bury it in a cave in Springfield, Missouri, is to deal with this problem. It is an ongoing present problem, and it's a problem acknowledged by most capitalist economists. John Maynard Keynes said the problem was underconsumption rather than overproduction, but he was pointing to the same problem. The military-industrial complex in the United States is an effort to deal with this problem, to keep spending going. There's all kinds of mechanisms that they've invented to try and resolve this problem, but it gets worse. What is the capitalist always trying to do? He wants to maximize the amount of profit he makes. And one of the main ways they do that is with what's called labor-saving technology. Get rid of workers and replace workers with machines. As they eliminate workers from the process of production, as there's fewer and fewer workers involved, as machines take the place of workers, the role of C in production decreases. There's a little bit of a problem with that. As C goes down, C2 also goes down, right? As C decreases, C2 also decreases. And as the role of the worker in production is reduced, the rate of profit that the capitalist makes goes down. And this is called the tendency of the falling rate of profit. Only human labor creates value. And this is something that Adam Smith acknowledged. This is something some of the popes even acknowledge. Human labor creates all value. And so when you reduce the role of human labor in production, the amount of value created decreases, and the ability of the capitalist to extract surplus value also decreases. So this causes the capitalist to have to churn out even more products because he's making less and less of a profit on the overall product. He's making less and less of a percentage, so he has to churn them out. So this problem of the worker never being able to buy back what he produces and more products being created than are necessary, this problem becomes exacerbated. And this points to what is understood to be the deeply irrational nature of the capitalist system.
Yes. So that's the problem with capitalism, is that the more efficient it becomes, the poorer people get. Why would self-driving cars be a bad thing, right? They should be a good thing. But in our irrational economic system, it would lead to mass poverty. So you ask, do you believe Africa deserves deterrence from nuclear power? No. I think Africa should have loads of nuclear power. I think nuclear power is a great thing. And I'm especially fusion, if we could do fusion. Now, right now, we don't have cold fusion, but nuclear weapons, obviously, I'm not a big fan of. But nuclear power, I'm all about it. I'm all about nuclear power. Nuclear power is good. It's efficient. There's nothing wrong with nuclear power. The anti-nuclear movement came from big oil, and it was largely a degrowth movement. And that was like the beginning of the left just completely collapsing, was the anti-nuclear movement. So, yeah, I have no problem with African countries. I think they should have nuclear power, absolutely. You made my night. Thank you. I'm born Caucasian Canadian that retired by delegation in Sierra Leone. Own a huge tribal village mansion, trying a end of life, slightly post-colonial with many children. Well, hey, we got to do what we can, man. Africa is the future. Africa is going to grow and expand. And actually, that's one of the predictions that Gaddafi made in the Green Book. He said, Africa will prevail, and Africa is the future. And, look, this world is full of hardship and injustice. And you mentioned on a previous thing that you were raising your kids in a way that was, that was unschooling and more gentle and all of that. I'm all about that. I'm all about, children being brought up to have confidence in themselves and not being degraded in the common ways that it's done, not having their confidence stripped away, and being encouraged to be creative and all of that. So, good for you. And I hope that my remarks tonight, these are issues that get me very fired up, but I hope that you didn't take any of it personally, right? And I do respect you as somebody who's, I guess you're in the African continent building some kind of anti-colonial movement and raising children in a way that is caring and helpful. I'm not your enemy, my friend. But I just tell you that I take these ideas very seriously, and I see a lot of things floating around now that are very, very contrary to what I've spent my life learning and understanding.